Yeah. So basically, this week we are going to focus on F&B and other operating departments. So today we will put our attention on F&B. So similar like rooms department, in F&B department, the segmentation is equally important, and it is defined in the usually to separate the revenue by type. So food revenue, so majority is food revenue, and then that is further divided into the venue revenue. So each venue will have their own revenue. So in a standard hotel, you have in-room dining, you have the outlets, venue, and then you have banquet and catering, minibar, and other food revenue. So venue food revenue includes all your individual outlets, right? So your bakeries, your snack shops, pool areas, spa, fitness facilities, restaurant, lounges, everything except these one which are shown below, in-room dining, banqueting, minibar, and other food revenue. So these are not included in the venue revenue. Even the venue food revenue need to be split out to each outlet separately, so that there is a clear distinguishment, and there is an individual profit and loss statement of each and every separate area, so that we can see which outlets are profitable and which outlets are not really profitable, right? The only major thing that is very which is varying here is the what is included in the food revenue. So it's a general concept, sale of all the food items means the food menu, salads, appetizers, soups, everything, and the non-alcoholic beverages in the specific dining area. So now, some hotels may have a different definition. For example, if it's a bar, in that case, all the beverages would be a beverage revenue, and all the sale of food would go as a food revenue. But in a food restaurant, which is all day dining, your specialty restaurant where food revenue is majority of revenue, the non-alcoholic beverages, for example, coffee, tea, juices, will be a part of the food revenue, not a part of beverage revenue, even though it may be in the beverage menu, but the revenue will actually go to the food. Usually definition, which was revised in 2011. I don't think there was a revision in the definition itself. As per usually, the non-alcoholic beverages sale would go to the food revenue, but um, the hotels are following different concepts. So what I would advise is you need to have a clear policy. Like for example, in Shangri-La, we used to have a policy that if the restaurant is a food restaurant, so there was a definition say that if the 60% of the revenue of the depart of the that particular outlet in the past 6 months is coming from food, not from the beverage menu, then it will be considered as a food restaurant. And the vice versa, if the majority of revenue, 60% of the revenue is coming from the beverages, then it will be considered as a bar. So there are different type of bar, right? There are bar which are serving primarily the alcohol or the beverages. There are certain bars which are serving both food and also also the beverage, and the revenue maybe half or maybe food is more and revenue and beverage is less, depending on the concept, right? It's a Mexican bar, the food may be more, or the barbecue bar, then the food revenue can be more. So in the Shangri-La, we had a policy. So we say that okay, if we every 6 months we're gonna review the past performance of the outlet, if it's and establish whether it's a food restaurant or a beverage or it's a bar. So if it's a bar, then the policy was that everything, all the beverages, whether it's alcoholic and non-alcoholic, i.e., the coffee, tea, and juices, will go to the beverage revenue. But if it's a food restaurant, then these non-alcoholic beverages, the juices, the tea, coffee, would go as a food revenue. But but the important point for accountants, for the chief accountants, in order to make a clear cost and revenue matching concept, is to see where is the cost of purchase going, right? So you may have to see how the ordering of the tea, coffee, and juices are and the fruits to produce those juices are being done. A majority of the places it's put into the food, as a food purchase. So means whenever you are selling the tea, coffee, juices, there is always a cost transfer from the food to the bar, right? From the food cost to the bar beverage revenue. So then always in the cost report there is allocation from the inventory that certain ingredients has been used in the beverage menu rather than in the food. So that allocation is always done, and the chefs and the kitchens are normally keeping the transfers, internal transfers from the on their transfer papers, so that the cost can be transferred equally. So the only thing is you have to make sure two things. One is that the classification of your revenue, whether you are treating all beverages to beverages or non-alcoholic to food, you have to keep it consistent over a period of time. You should not change. If you want to change, you have to make sure that the prior years is also changed, so that when you are making a comparison, you know what is the there's no unnecessary difference variances created, right? The second thing you have to make sure is the cost, if is going to the right portion. If it's included in a beverage revenue, that means all the costs are related to the non-alcoholic beverage is also going to the beverage, also going to the beverage cost, not to the food cost, because that sometimes happen. That has happened in the past when we change the definition. The revenue was changed, but the cost controller was not aware of the change, so they did not really make any process in place to make sure that the food revenue was differentiated between the beverage cost and the food cost, right? So there was a cost variance in the, so cost, food cost was becoming higher and beverage cost was going very low, and the reason being there was not enough cost transfer. So imagine you are buying all your fruits in the food revenue, because normally that's the food cost, and you're using it in making smoothies and juices and fresh juices, right? Or in the garnishing if of your cocktails. So what will happen is that if you have a very high sale of juices in that particular month, the cost remains in the food, and and the revenue will go to beverages. So means there is a disproportionate thing in the beverage cost. So beverage cost will be lower and food cost will be higher, because all the cost is going to food, but there is no revenue, right? So you may want to recheck if that is happening, and how the cost controller is transferring the cost of the juices. The coffee maybe is clear, because normally coffee is not used in the production of food. Tea is not used in the production of food, but but the other ingredients, the fruits, are used in the in the beverages, right? And the other ingredients like sugar or other things are used in the food and beverages both. So you may want to see how the cost is transferred, whether it can be based on recipe, can be based on the specific food transfers. They have to have a specific process how they are transferring the cost, whether it's based on recipe or it can be based on the specific request. But specific request is very difficult to make. I mean, it's not possible for anybody to keep a track of how many juices I sell today, and in that how many mangoes or how many oranges I use, right? So it's probably going to be based on the recipe. That's the easier way, but you can check that out. So the only thing that I would suggest here is either to follow usually, but it's not really that important of a difference, because the non-alcoholic beverages portion to the food onto the beverages is not normally very high. It's quite low, right? Majority of the revenue is coming either from the food or from the non-alcoholic beverages. The sorry, alcoholic beverages. Non-alcoholic beverage revenue is not that very significant to impact the proportion or the statistics. So you can get away with the including all the beverages into beverage revenue. But the only thing you may want to check is the cost allocation. So the other allocation in this revenue is, apart from the venue food revenue, you have in-room dining, banquet, which is coming from your events, minibar food revenue when they are selling in the minibar. Minibar usually is in many hotels they put everything into the beverages, But the packaged food and the non-alcoholic beverages from usually standpoint still remain as a food. But in many hotels, like in Shangri-La, in for minibar, whatever we sell, cookies, candies, bottled water, or any food, we just put into the minibar. Means as a bar revenue because it's a minibar. We don't really differentiate because it's not that significant either. And then you have other food revenue, means the other consumables, which are really the not designated in the any of the outlet, right? So it can be anything else, maybe a takeaway as well. Then you have total food revenue, and then the beverage revenue includes only the sale of the alcoholic item, because non-alcoholic items we have already included in the food revenue. So from usually standpoint, beverage revenue is only the sale of all alcoholic beverages, and it includes the cocktails. So non see the mocktails, which is non-alcoholic, the revenue from usually standpoint would go as a food revenue. But the cocktails, because it includes alcohol, will be under the beverage revenue. And then you have to understand the similar way we have to recognize the cost of beverages as well, whether wherever we are putting it. The only challenge sometimes you have is the kitchens are making the transfer from one outlet or one venue to the other venue. So let's say there is a Chinese restaurant and there's an Italian restaurant. There is usually a transfer between the two restaurants because sometimes they are running out of inventory, or they may get food order from one outlet to another outlet. So usually there is a transfer. So the job of the chief accountant is also to see the percentages, and together with the food cost controller, you have to see if there is any significant transfers happening within the outlets. You cannot track each and every transfer, but so far as it does not affect your overall food cost, that should not be a problem. But if it's affecting the trends and statistics, means there is a major transfer, then you may have to investigate. Then you have allowances. Allowances similar are as in the rooms department we saw. Allowances are discounts. So means the revenue that we are calculating here, the food revenue and the beverage revenue is always the full sale, excluding of course the tax and service charge portion. But the other allowances, any reduction in the revenue because of the service problems, would have to recognize as an allowance, not in the error in posting. Error in posting need to be adjusted in back to the revenue, but the other any service related things you have to recognize as allowance, so that you can track what is the cost of mistakes basically, and you can see whether it's high or low in any particular month, and you can take corrective actions, right? Then you have the other revenues, which are not consumables but are other services provided in the restaurant, right? So you in the banquet, sometimes when you are doing the when you are doing the services, you have audio visual services, which we are normally renting out from the third party. So here you have to be very careful. There are two considerations that you may have to understand. Is one is whether to recognize the audio visual revenue fully, means whatever you charge from the customer as a revenue, or only the net portion. Sometimes let's say you don't have a projector in the outlet, there is a guest party in the outlet in the birthday. So you have bought a projector and you told the guest, okay, the projector will cost you 2000 because the outside supplier is going to cost us at 1500. 500 is our margin and you will get it for 1000 for 2000, right? So that may happen, 2000. And what if the condition is that the guest is asking directly from the outside party, he make the arrangement, the situation remains the same. The outside cost is only 1500 and the hotel service charge is 500. In that case, how much revenue would be charged to the P&L?
So in that case, 500.
Yeah. So the decision point here is who is responsible for the service. If hotel is responsible for the service, price is decided by the hotel. And the performance obligation, i.e., the responsibility to make sure everything is right, falls on hotel, then the revenue should be recognized full. If the responsibility is not on the hotel, he's just providing the allowing the third party to install and charging their service charge on behalf of it, but the actual performance falls on the third party which is contracted by the guest directly. In that case, you will charge only your service charge, not the whole revenue as a revenue. So that's the clarity. And then the audiovisual cost, I mean the cost of third party would go in the audiovisual cost. And then you sometimes charge the function room rentals. Maybe somebody want to just take a rental by hour, don't ask for F&B. So that's usually you have a cover charge. And cover charges is where you are charging something to cover the minimum of the food cost. So that includes the entrance to the events where the food and beverage is sold. So sometimes there are also cases that, let's say, there is a meeting room, right? And the meeting room has a minimum rental to pay. Let's say there is a minimum spend of 15,000 INR to spend. So means that the guest has to spend minimum 15,000, and but actual spend of the guest in food and beverage is only 12,000. So how you will recognize the revenue? The guest has to pay 3,000, right? 15,000 total, but the actual food revenue is 12,000. So would that 3,000, the additional 3,000 will go as the cover charges or somewhere else? Yeah, you may want to ask the the income audit, or if to check if there is any policy of that. Usually sometime, but there is sometimes like this, right? That you have a minimum spend to put on as a, if you are renting out the ballroom, you are renting out the meeting charge, that say that you tell the guest that this is the minimum spend that you have to do. But everything is up to you, what you want to order. So, and sometimes the guest may not reach the minimum spend, but the hotel will charge minimum amount. So not everything will go to food and beverage, because actual revenue for food and beverage is the actual amount that is consumed by the guest. So additional amount would either be going as the cover charges or miscellaneous other revenue. In our hotels, we put it as cover charges, because we say this is the minimum amount that they have to spend. So if they are not spending it, we will charge that as a cover charge. But many hotels, they say no, this is not a cover charge, it's a miscellaneous other revenue, because cover charge is usually only the entrance of the venue, not the differential between the minimum charge and the actual consumption. So it depends on the hotel. The only thing, you need to have a clear policy on it. Otherwise, the income auditor who is going to allocate the revenue may not know where to put these charges, right? And you have the service and service charges, which is we discussed in the past, that is if it's a mandatory, then it will be recorded as a service charge. But if it's a discretionary for the guest whether to pay or not to pay, then it will not be recorded in the revenue or in the expenses. So that's the total revenue from the food and beverage. Apart from this food and beverage total revenue, before we go into the cost, let us look at some of the metrics, some of the statistic report that are usually required by usually. So these are certain reports that are required by usually. So it may come from your PMS directly, or you may have to make them in Excel, right? So there is usually a food and beverage revenue mix by the venue. So you can have the venue subdivided into your specific outlets, Chinese, Italian, however. Then you have catering, in-room dining, audiovisual, functional room, and other charges. So that the management is aware of what is the revenue mix of different type of revenues. And then you have an average check, percent average check. So you have to recognize the covers. Now, when you are recognizing the cover, there is usually confusion between the hotels how they are going to count the covers, right? So, for example, there is a one guest who is coming for lunch, right? And he take a lunch. After that, he settle the bill. He go out, and maybe 5 minutes later, he come again and ask for a coffee. So you would recognize that as two cover or one cover. And reason why it's should be two cover is because the cost of table setup, the amenities, everything is going to be double, right? He is not sitting on the same table at the same instance and asking for the check. So it means that it's two separate covers. So sometimes the certain hotels are not recognizing it two separate covers, but putting it into the one cover because they are coming again and again. So that happens usually. And sometimes there is a guest. Let's say he eat in breakfast. He don't settle the check. He go out, and after in the dinner time he come again. The same guest, he eat again, and then he settle the check at the one time. So ideally there should be two checks, but because it's the same check, the staff may forget it and they put as a one cover. So that sometimes also happens. Then there are split checks, right? So let's say there are five guests who are sitting in one table. They want to split it out. Sometime by mistake, they keep five in both the covers, both the checks, rather than splitting it based on the number of covers, how they are splitting the check. So usually there are quite a bit of mistakes, usually operating departments do. So the income auditor has to check what is the actual guest count, right? So that they can make sure that they are getting the checks clear out. So there are clear policies issued out so that it's clearer for the operating department how to count the checks and how to count the cover so that they can calculate the average check properly. So that statistics is important. And then you have other statistics on the food, cost of food, beverages, then cost of beverages, and then you have inventory turns. So inventory turns by separate: liquor, wine, bottled beer, draft beer. So what is the meaning of inventory turns? Inventory turns means what is your inventory in your, what is the sale divided by your average inventory, right? So that you can see how many times we are able to turn our inventory into. And then you have the other by seat, per revenue per available seat, and then the by group room sold. You have the room rentals per group room sold. So these are per square feet. These are usually, these statistics are very important for the asset managers because they want to make sure that every single feet that they are constructing in the hotel is optimized, right? So rather than, so normally based on these statistics, they decide what should be the, whether the function room size is enough or is too much. If the per square feet revenue is very low compared to the ComSet, it means obviously you have a very large catering or banquet space. You may want to convert into another usage. So that's how you normally they realize. So you have to keep a track on it so that you can see what is the per group room sold and revenue footage. Very good understanding of these statistics is helpful in the asset management. And then you have these other statistics. So these are certain definitions which are there. You will be getting this PDF in the course. If you're not, then just let me know. I think I will recheck if this is there. I think I uploaded it so that it's there for the students. But if it's not, then I will upload this PDF there so that you have this soft copy. And then there you have some other statistics reports, which is usually helpful for the, again, the analysis of by venue, number of seats, revenue per available seat, actual budget and last year, and the departmental profit. And then the cost statistics for the cost of food sale and cost of beverage sales. So these usually will help by each venue so that you can understand really which venue is more profitable, which venue is not profitable. Now, how you are going to get a departmental profit unless you have the cost, all the cost which are also allocated to the specific venue. But usually you have the inventory usage by the F&B administrative department, which is taking into their own storage and sometimes issuing out to the outlets individually. And in most of the cases, the outlet is directly asking, right? So you have to really see how the cost allocations are structured so that you can identify the cost of departments. So certain costs like direct cost, food and beverage is easy to get. from the cost control reports. But the other costs like printing and stationery, general uniforms, those costs are not that very easy and straightforward to be allocated. So you have to allocate those costs into the individual venue separately by cost center, uh, either by terms of revenue or in terms of cover served, or in terms of the number of guests that they are serving, or by the number of seats. For example, the background music, if you have only one contract for whole property, and then you are just paying one lump sum amount, then you may have to split that cost by the number of seats, because it doesn't matter how many covers are sitting there and what revenue they are doing, right? Because the cost would be charged based on number of seats or number of the restaurants, not by the number of revenues. So you have to really understand how the cost is charged and then allocate that. So that may depend heavily on how the costs are structured by individual hotels. So before we allocate the cost, you have to understand how they are structured. Then you have cost of sales, which includes the spoilage, wastage, are included in the cost of sales. So food costs include the coffee, tea, milk, sodas, and other non-alcoholic beverages. But in case you are recording your beverages into the beverage revenue, then these cost of coffee, tea, sodas, other non-alcoholic beverages, will go to the beverage cost, except the milk and juice. Milk, you may have to see how much is used in production and how much is it used in the beverages, right? So you have to be clear on that. Uh, then you have sometimes you have steward sales, that is directly credited to the cost of food sales, because not really your the business of the restaurant to do a steward sales, right, or commissary sales. So you have to put those into the cost rather than into the revenue and put as a cost, otherwise your cost percentage will be very high. And the cost of sale also does not include cost of food used in production for the employees, because that's the cost which is put into the staff meal. So these cost has to be allocated properly, right? And also you have to make sure there is a enough allocation and there is a correct allocation for the complimentary services, gift, amenities, chocolates given in the rooms for complimentary or staff dining, or the gifts. So you have to credit that out from the cost of sales, so that you get a right cost of food cost. Same for beverage sales. So the beverage sale also need to be split into by the venue, and also you have to be very careful in the cost allocations, because these are cocktails, mocktails. If it's a direct like hard liquor, wine bottles, liquor bottles, then it's not a problem because they are easily one to one identified. But cost of cocktails, mocktails is something which is made up of many things, right? It made up of food items, made up of beverage items. So you have to you normally the hotels have a standard recipe for cocktails and mocktails. And what do we do as a cost control? We look at the total value at the end of the day, and we normally charge out based on the recipe rather than based on the actual things. But you also have to be careful in the spoilage and spillage in making cocktails, because there is a high spillage and spoilage in beverages. So that is the cost of beverages. So basically, the important thing for the accountants, because the cost of food and beverage as usually is done by the cost controller. But for certain properties, when you don't have a cost controller, the responsibility will come to finance department, right? Because or the chief accountants, because the cost executive may be working under them. So then they have to make sure that the cost allocations are done properly, and the majority of the tricking points in the food cost reports are the spoilages, wastages, because to avoid being charged from the food cost, usually the chef would always try that all the spoilages and wastages are recorded as separately and given a credit into loss and damages, because they will say, oh, this is not, maybe the chiller was not working, for example. That's why there is a spoilage. But that's not really a reason for crediting out the food cost, because they were supposed to maintain it. But there may be certain situations. For example, in one case, one of my hotels, there was a major electricity breakdown, and the usually the chillers were not working, right? And for 3 days there was no electricity, no generator, and all the food in the chiller was spoiled. Now that is an extraordinary event. It's not because of the chef mistake, right? It's a normal thing which has happened. So we credited out the food cost so that it doesn't affect their statistic. But take as instance, if let's say there is a food which is written, which is standing in the chiller, but because of the chiller got blast for 1 hour, and then the food got spoiled because of that, that is not something which is extraordinary, right? So that sometimes you have to see, play by the ear, what is whose fault it is, whose responsibility what is. If it's the kitchen who's supposed to manage it, then the cost will remain there. If it was not in if it was beyond the cost, beyond the control of the chef, then you have to credit out the cost. So you have to really be instance who is responsible for that thing, right? Because you cannot just say that the spoilage has to be the cost of food sale, no matter what is the circumstance. So you cannot always say that. Spillage and wastage again is, you have to play by the ear, but wastage is in the direct control of the chef. So here the idea of putting the spoilage, spillage, and waste into the cost of food sold is to make sure that chefs are responsible, because their KRAs are usually the food cost percentage, right? Their performance is measured by how well they are able to keep their food cost within the budget. So if we take it out from their food cost control, then they will not be incentivized to control the spoilage, waste, and spillages. But if they are incentivized to control they are made responsible for this in their food cost report, then they have every incentive to make sure there is no spoilage, no wastage, no spillage. So that's the logic. But you have to always see what is the real reason, whether it was in the control or not in control, because you don't want to mix the extraordinary and non-extraordinary events into the same cost report. So the next year your food cost report will become higher, right? So even if let's say this year food cost is high, what would happen next year? You will get a difficulty because of the high food cost. So you will use that high food cost as a basis for next year budget. Means you will allow them to spend higher amount than they should, right? So that's the important factor that you have to remember when you are making the food cost report or analyzing the food cost report. How much portion of it is really the spoilage, wastage, and spillage. So you need to put a control in the next coming budgets. Well, residual cost basically is the meaning of the items which are not unused items, right? So in the butcher, usually you will have something like packaging. There may be packaging, there may be defrosting, there may be the blood which is going out as and is of no use basically. And then usually you have a leftover items like the bones, the head of fish, or the other items which you still can use, but not for the purpose of your main dishes. So those items are used for other things. But this residual cost is not accounted anywhere. Basically, it's a part of your yield loss. So you will have to allocate it based onto the net product. So you will only be considering two costs. One is the gross product, and one is the final. And then the gross cost will become the cost of the final net product basically. So if you have 1 kilo of beef which is come to the butcher process, you take out the bones, take out everything else, and the final is left only 800 grams. So if you bought at $2, then the $2 will become the cost of 800 grams. So that's a yield loss of around 20%. So the residual cost is just only a term to show in the cost sheet, out of my total $2, what is the value of the residual items that we are still showing in the process. So there are three types, right? One is the final product, one is the waste, which is going out and no has no use, and then the rest is the leftover, means the things which are not really a waste, but not really a part of your final product either. That is the residual cost. So that is the cost of food and beverages both.